vote this evening. The purpose of tonight's meeting is for staff to receive general policy direction and feedback from the village board in terms of the types of zoning restrictions that the board would expect there to be in place if the board were to lift the village's ban, either in whole or in part, on adult use cannabis businesses in Woodridge. Going to ask if staff is ready to present this evening.
We are, Mayor. Okay, so as the mayor said, this is a second workshop on adult use cannabis. We had our last one on January 20th. Just going to give a little bit of overview over what we're going to try to accomplish tonight. So we're just going to confirm what I understood to be the board consensus at that January 20th meeting. We're going to review the key highlights from our neighboring communities in terms of what their ordinances say. We're going to look at various proximity restriction scenarios for you. We're going to look to get some board consensus on direction for dispensaries, and then if time allows, direction for the other business categories that we talked about. And then finally, we're going to just discuss direction on any other areas to be addressed by the Plan Commission. Okay. So, and please correct me if I'm misstating this. My understanding from the last meeting is that the majority of the board supported allowing cannabis dispensary businesses. There was consensus agreement to prohibit on-premise consumption, and the board supported a municipal cannabis retailer's occupation tax of 3%, which represents the maximum tax allowed. Okay, I'm not hearing anybody say I'm off base, so I'm going to move forward. There's a little bit of additional information that was requested from the board. The first one was a question in terms of, could an existing vape store convert to a dispensary? And the thought is that given the sales opportunities for cannabis dispensaries in terms of what retail sales are likely to produce, the licensing costs and the complexity of the process, it's more likely that a dispensary would be the sole or at least the primary business, and it's not likely to be an ancillary business to an existing business like a vape store. That was a lot of words all jumbled into one sentence, so please tell me if you'd like additional direction on that. Okay, and then the second question that I wanted to follow up on was, what kind of job growth is being generated by cannabis businesses? So there are reports just in terms of nationally, how many jobs are generated, and they are not defined by each business category, rather they're overall. So nationally, there are an estimated 428,000 cannabis business sector jobs as of 2020, as of 2022 today. And then in this year, there is an expectation of an additional over 100,000 jobs to be added. So just to give you a little bit of information following up from the last meeting. All right, so this is what we're going to be looking to get some direction on tonight. First is to determine, do you want to proactively identify locations where dispensaries would be allowed? And if you do, what are those locations? So what I mean by that is you can either identify what proximity restrictions you'd like to have in place, which then says, as long as you meet those proximity restrictions, you can, the address is allowed to have a dispensary. Or you could simply say, these are the locations where we would allow a dispensary. And then secondly, are you ready tonight to address cannabis business, the other cannabis business categories, or would you prefer to focus just on dispensaries tonight? All right, so I want to leave that open. So we're going to really, the majority of the meeting, we're going to focus on dispensaries so we can get some direction on that. And if the board feels comfortable on the rest of those categories, we can go through those. If you prefer to wait, we can wait. So just, I don't need answers to these questions yet. I'm just posing them to you, okay? And then at the end of the meeting, what we're going to be looking to do is, at least in that first column, the dispensary column, we're going to want to know what the max number of dispensaries that the board is interested in allowing, whether those would be special uses or permitted uses, what zoning categories, and by this, I don't necessarily mean the exact zoning district, but general zoning categories. So if you said in the business districts, and then the plan commission can make some determinations as to which business districts, for example. And then any proximity restrictions you'd want to put into place related to residential, schools, daycares, and any other restriction, proximity restriction you'd want to put into place. So we're really going to be focusing on that first column, trying to answer all of those questions. And then if the board has time and is comfortable, we can go through the others. Any questions about this procedure?
Peggy,
Yes.
as a board, can we give an opinion on the number of dispensaries to have with a limitation and then come back a year later and change that?
You of course can. The board can, just like you do with video gaming or with liquor licenses, you can, that's the board's prerogative as to how many licenses they want to make available. I'm sorry, not licenses, but how many they're going to allow. Yes, I'm sorry, Attorney Pat.
With the caveat that if you wanted to reduce the number from, let's say you were to permit 3, and then you wanted to reduce it to 2, if there were already 3 licensees, they would be grandfathered in, obviously.
Will probably be the other way.
Yes. So just making sure that it's clear.
I'm sorry, I'm going to do something just really quickly for the benefit of people at home. I'm sorry. Let me just. So that people on YouTube can see a little bit better. Okay. So now I'm going to just highlight the findings that we received from looking at our neighboring communities and their ordinances for those communities that have, who allow cannabis dispensaries and other businesses. So in terms of, let's see if I can move this. You can see just this table just provides for you the total number of dispensaries that each of the communities allows. It's anywhere, I'm sorry, the first column is how many are in operation. So Naperville and Westmont and Romeoville all have dispensaries in place. Naperville and Romeoville had medical cannabis facilities already prior to the 2020 law. Those are now also dispensaries. Naperville has 2 more in addition to that, just that medical and adult use dispensary. Westmont has 1. Darien and Downers Grove do not have any. Bolingbrook has just approved last month dispensary. So they don't, no one has gotten a license since Bolingbrook has passed their ordinance. And then in that second column, it shows you the limit on the number of dispensaries allowed. So there's a couple that have no limitations. And then we've got Darien with 1 and the others with 3. You can see that all of the communities allow dispensaries in their business districts with the exception of Darien. I'm sorry, with the exception of Downers Grove. And then specific to dispensaries, Naperville and Darien allow those as permitted uses. The rest allow them as special uses. And then all of them have a 3% cannabis retailer's occupation tax in place, with the exception of Darien that does not. Any questions? Yes.
Yes. Can either you or Attorney Pat just give a brief description of the difference between the permitted use and the special use?
A permitted use is a use that, as it says, if you meet the criteria set forth by the board in the code, then you are allowed to operate your business in that district. A special use indicates that the use would be allowed in a particular district, but it would in fact be tied into certain restrictions and reviews that the board would impose. So a way to, in practical sense, a special use is a more restrictive allowance and grants the board greater control over a particular applicant and how they operate their business.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so now we're just going to look at the types of cannabis businesses that are allowed in these communities. So now we're looking at more than just dispensaries. I just want to give you a picture. Naperville does not allow anything other than dispensaries, although they have had some requests for that to be expanded. I haven't seen any evidence that they've taken action to expand it, but I think that was something that was put forward to them. The other communities, Darien allows them as permitted uses in every category. And the same goes with Downers Grove and Westmont. Bolingbrook allows them as special uses except for in the processor extractor category. And then Romeoville only allows dispensaries and cultivation centers. Any questions in terms of what those are? Okay. It is a little bit confusing, the difference between infusers and processors, and they all they sort of do run into one another. Okay, so now I want to look at proximity restrictions, and I want to point out to you that there was an error in my memo. Naperville's residential proximity restriction is not 1,000 feet, it's 250 feet. So I just wanted to point that out to you. I had copied over the 1,000 feet from the primary secondary school. So if you look at just residential, there's a whole breadth of different approaches that communities are taking, with the least restrictive being that there's no proximity restriction to 500 feet. So that's what we're looking at in terms of what we're seeing with our neighboring communities. In terms of primary and secondary school, those are running from 500 feet to 1,300 feet. And you do see that there are a few of them that are 1,000 feet. And I think at least for one or two of them, when I was looking through their information, they were trying to be consistent with the advertising limitations. So if you remember, the signage for cannabis can't be within 1,000 feet of a school. And so those communities sort of copycatted on that distance restriction. In terms of preschools and daycares, only Downers Grove and Romeoville have those restrictions in place. Those restrictions we'll talk about those a little bit later in terms of what that does in terms of limiting locations in Woodridge, because daycares are located in commercial districts, right? Whereas schools are generally located in residential districts. So it has there's a difference in terms of how that impacts where cannabis dispensaries can be located. In terms of houses of worship, no one has a restriction with the exception of Romeoville, and theirs is a little bit complicated. It's more related to manufacturing districts than it is to other districts. It's not a residential proximity restriction. It's related to manufacturing. And then Romeoville has a 1,000-foot restriction for specific locations. So it's related to their recreation center. It's related to the Edward Fitness Center, Village Hall, the library. And then we do see that Downers Grove has a 1,300-foot restriction on parks, and Westmont has 300 feet. And then in terms of other dispensaries, they all follow that state requirement of 1,500 feet, with the exception of Naperville that has a mile. I do just want to point out that Darien does not have any proximity restrictions listed because they took the approach of identifying locations where dispensaries can go. So rather than saying it has to be this many feet from X or this many feet from Y, they simply said, these are the locations, these are the addresses and pins where a dispensary can be located. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through some potential dispensary locations. And what I did was I assumed 1,000-foot distance restriction from primary and secondary schools. So these are existing primary and secondary schools. And then I looked at what would be allowed, what are locations that would be allowed at these various distances from residential. So when we look at that column that says distance, that's distance from residential. So at 1 mile, there's really just one building on Bowden that would be allowed to have a dispensary. When you take it down to 1,500 feet, there are some portions of the non-residential area south of I-55. If you reduce it to 1,000 feet, it expands the area south of I-55. It brings in portions of the Lamont Road corridor, part of Murphy Road, and the Target outlot. If you reduce it down to 500 feet, it brings in most of the Target Mall and Center Point. It brings in parts of 75th Street east of 355 and parts of the Boughton Woodward corridor. And then if you take it to 250 feet, it brings in all of the Lamont Road corridor, all of the Target Mall, except for just the northwestmost building. It brings in parts of 7 bridges, I'm sorry. It significantly expands the 75th Street east of 355 and Boughton Woodward corridors. And then if you take it to 100 feet, it brings in all of the Target Mall, all of the Center Point, most of 7 bridges, and then more of 75th Street and Boughton Woodward corridors, including nearly all of Woodgrove. I do also want to note that our existing churches are located in residential districts. So if you have a 100-foot or greater distance proximity requirement for residential, that will also incorporate churches because they're coterminous. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about this? I did want to note that if the 1,000-foot school restrictions are expanded to include preschools and daycares, that will eliminate the Target Mall, 7 Bridges, Center Point, and 75th and Woodward. I noted in the ordinances from other communities that they specified when they talked about proximity restrictions that they are based on pre-existing uses. So a pre-existing school, a dispensary couldn't be located within 200, I'm sorry, in their case, 1,000 feet from a pre-existing school. But a dispensary wouldn't have to close because the school came in after the fact. Attorney Pat can probably speak better to that in terms of that probably, I don't know if that has to be included or not. It may go without saying that they're grandfathered in, but I did want to note that that was included in the ordinances.
It likely goes without saying, but it's worth saying anyway. So.
And then I talked a little bit already about how the houses of worship are coterminous with the residential district. So whatever restrictions you have for residential will apply to houses of worship in terms of what's existing today. Okay. And now I thought it'd be appropriate. I think the mayor wanted to provide for public comment. We don't have anybody on, and we don't have any participants via Zoom.
So thank you very much, Assistant Village Administrator Halleck, for the presentation and all the information. So I'm sorry I missed some of your last sentence, but I'll go ahead and talk about public comment at this point. And before we begin the public comment portion, I do want to take a moment and cover just a few guidelines, please. We know that many people have taken time out of their schedules and their busy lives to be here with us, whether in person or via Zoom, to share your position on adult use cannabis in our community. The village board is very interested in hearing from you, our neighbors, on this matter. We want to be sure that we allow ample opportunity for public comment so that we can maximize the number of people that would like to speak before us. So I'm going to ask, as we do always, that you limit your statements, please, to 3 minutes. And with the help of Attorney Pat, when you're approximately 30 seconds remaining, he will then let you know and ask that you please take the remaining time to conclude your remarks. Once your name is called to speak, please state your name and your address for the public record. If you are here representing a large group, I would encourage, and we guess we can probably skip that. Thank you very much, Peggy, for sharing that view. If anyone does have a written statement or document that they would like to present to the board, you can do that. For those who would like to submit a written public comment on adult use cannabis, you can again do so by going out on our village website and going under the public comment page for further instructions. And I'm going to end it there. I'm not sure if we do have any speakers this evening or anyone wishing to make a comment. So I'm going to ask Administrator Stonich if there's any public comments.
Thank you, Mayor Cunningham. We have no one who's present in the boardroom. We have a few written public comments that we have received, however.
I'm going to ask Administrator Stonich if there's any public. Administrator Stonich, I'm sorry, there was some reverberation going on there. Do we have any comments at all or anyone on Zoom that wishes to make a comment?
We are unable to hear Administrator Stonich. Or anyone in the boardroom.
Hi, Mayor and Trustee Page. It's Chris. I'm sending a text to Al and Peggy on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Please bear with us. I know that they know that we're unable to hear them at this time.
Administrator Stone said they're working on it right now.
Thank you very much, Director Bethel.